My car wouldn't start, making sounds I'd never heard. Frustrated, I missed my flight. 2 hours later, my coworker called sobbing. "Everyone on board is dead." I asked, "How?" She whispered, "The plane just..." The grinding sound my Toyota made at 5:43 that morning wasn't normal. I'd owned the car for 6 years and knew every rattle, every squeak, every quirk of its aging engine. This was different. A metallic shrieking followed by 3 sharp clicks, then nothing. Just the dashboard lights glowing weakly while I sat in my garage turning the key over and over like maybe the 4th or 5th try would somehow work differently. I checked my phone. Flight 2819 to Chicago departed at 8:15 from SeaTac. I had exactly 2 hours and 32 minutes to get to the airport, through security, and to my gate. Normally plenty of time. But my car was dead and I lived 45 minutes from the airport in good traffic. I called an Uber. Estimated wait time was 18 minutes. Then I called my neighbor David thinking maybe he could jumpstart my battery. No answer. Called AAA. 40-minute wait for roadside assistance. I did the math in my head and felt my chest tighten. I wasn't going to make it. I grabbed my laptop bag and rolling suitcase and dragged them to the curb to wait for the Uber, but when it finally arrived at 6:07, I-5 was already backed up from an overturned semi near Tacoma. The driver, a quiet man named Raj, apologized 3 times even though it wasn't his fault. We sat in traffic barely moving while I watched the clock on my phone tick forward. 6:24, 6:39, 6:52. By the time we got to the airport, it was 7:48. I had 27 minutes to get through security and to a gate that was probably a 15-minute walk from the checkpoint. I ran anyway, pulling my suitcase behind me, my laptop bag bouncing against my hip. Made it to the TSA line at 7:54. There were maybe 30 people ahead of me. I asked if I could cut through because my flight was boarding. The agent said everyone's flight was boarding. I stood there sweating in my business casual clothes while the line crawled forward. At 8:11, I was still 4 people away from the metal detector. I pulled up the airline app on my phone and watched the gate status change from boarding to departed at exactly 8:15. I'd missed it. Missed the flight to the biggest client presentation of my career. I'd been working as a senior structural engineer at Prescott & Lane for 8 years when this project landed on my desk. Midwest Regional Airport needed a complete overhaul of their Terminal C infrastructure. $200 million contract. My boss, Catherine Donnelly, 26 years in aviation engineering, picked me to lead the team. It was the kind of project that could make a career. The kind that got you promoted to partner. I'd spent 4 months preparing the presentation, coordinating with contractors, running stress tests and load simulations. The Airport Authority Board was meeting today at 2 p.m. I was supposed to be there with printed proposals, 3D renderings, the whole pitch. Now I was standing in an airport security line watching my flight take off without me. I texted Catherine. "Car trouble. Missed the flight. Can we reschedule?" She responded immediately. "Reschedule a board meeting with 12 people? Are you serious? Try to get on the next flight." I checked the airline app. Next direct flight to Chicago was at 11:45 a.m. I could make the presentation if I took that one, barely. I rebooked, paid the $200 change fee, and went to find coffee. Sat at a table near my new gate and tried to calm down. Tried to convince myself this wasn't a disaster, just a setback. Everything would be fine. My phone rang at 9:52. Caller ID showed Melissa Ortiz, one of my junior engineers who was supposed to meet me in Chicago. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Melissa, slow down. What happened?" I said, my voice steady even though my hands started shaking. "The plane," she choked out between sobs. "Flight 2819. It's gone. It crashed. Everyone's dead." The coffee cup slipped from my hand and hit the floor, splashing hot liquid across my shoes. People at nearby tables turned to look. I stood up fast enough that my chair scraped loudly. "What are you talking about? What plane?" But I already knew. "Your flight, the one you were supposed to be on. It went down about 30 minutes after takeoff. They're saying there are no survivors." She kept talking, but I couldn't hear her anymore over the ringing in my ears. I looked up at the departure board. Flight 2819 to Chicago should have landed by now. Instead, the status just said, "See agent." Airport security was moving through the terminal in groups. A woman's voice came over the PA system asking everyone to remain calm and stay in the terminal. I hung up on Melissa and immediately called Catherine. She answered on the first ring. "Have you heard?" Her voice was hollow. "I just found out. Melissa called me." "David was on that plane," Catherine said. "David Renfro, our lead aviation consultant. The guy who'd been working on this project longer than anyone, who'd flown out yesterday to prepare for today's presentation." Oh my God. So was Jennifer. And Troy. The whole advance team. 3 of our engineers. People I'd worked with for years. People I'd had lunch with last week. People who took the flight I was supposed to be on because my car wouldn't start. "I need to go," Catherine said. "The office is chaos. FAA is already calling. I'll call you back." She hung up. I sat back down in a chair that wasn't mine and stared at nothing. The terminal around me was moving, but I felt frozen. Security was directing people away from certain gates. Families were crying. Some people were on their phones frantically calling loved ones. A man near me was arguing with an airline representative about getting a refund. Everything felt surreal and distant. My phone buzzed with news alerts. Commercial aircraft crashes shortly after takeoff from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. All 147 passengers and 6 crew members feared dead. Preliminary reports suggest catastrophic mechanical failure. I opened my email. 13 new messages. Most from colleagues asking if I was okay, if I'd been on the flight. One from our HR director with the subject line, "Tragedy, company statement." I couldn't read it, couldn't process what was happening. 4 people from my company were dead because they took the flight I was supposed to be on. The flight I would have been on if my car had started. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall and tried to breathe normally. Failed. Ended up sitting on the closed toilet lid with my head between my knees while my chest heaved and my eyes burned. Someone knocked on the stall door asking if I was all right. I said yes, even though I wasn't. When I finally came out and washed my face with cold water, I looked pale and shaky in the mirror. My phone said it was 10:34. I'd been in the bathroom for almost 40 minutes. The airport was being evacuated. TSA was directing everyone back through security to the main terminal. I grabbed my bags and followed the crowd, moving on autopilot. Outside, news vans were already setting up, reporters interviewing passengers who'd been on other flights. I kept my head down and walked to the rideshare pickup area, requested an Uber home, sat in the back seat while the driver tried to make conversation about the crash. I gave one-word answers until he stopped talking. Got home at 11:52. My Toyota was still in the garage, still dead, still making that horrible grinding sound when I tried the key one more time just to see. I went inside and turned on the news. Every channel was covering the crash. Flight 2819, Boeing 737, departed SeaTac at 8:15 a.m., lost contact with air traffic control at 8:48. Witnesses reported seeing the plane nosedive into a forested area approximately 40 miles southeast of Seattle. Recovery teams were on site. The footage showed wreckage scattered across trees, smoke, emergency vehicles. I turned it off. Couldn't watch anymore. Catherine called at 1:17 p.m. She'd been in meetings with company lawyers and FAA representatives all morning. The airport project was suspended indefinitely out of respect for the victims. The client had already sent condolences and postponed all meetings. She asked how I was doing. I said I didn't know. She said the company was arranging grief counselors for anyone who needed them. I thanked her and hung up. Sat on my couch staring at the wall until it got dark outside. The memorial service was 4 days later. Prescott and Lane rented a hotel conference room that could hold 300 people. David's wife spoke about their 22 years of marriage. Jennifer's parents flew in from Florida. Troy's boyfriend read a poem that made everyone cry. I sat in the back row feeling like an imposter. These people had lost someone. I'd just gotten lucky. Afterward, people kept coming up to me saying how grateful they were that I was okay, how horrible it must feel knowing I almost died. Each conversation made my skin crawl. I didn't almost die. I missed a flight because of car trouble. That's not the same as surviving a plane crash. I left early and went home and drank half a bottle of wine while reading news coverage of the investigation. The NTSB had recovered both black boxes. Preliminary analysis suggested a catastrophic failure in the hydraulic system, but they were still investigating. No official cause yet. The airline released a statement expressing condolences and promising full cooperation with investigators. The FAA grounded all aircraft of that model pending safety inspections. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is this Diane Foster?" I responded. "Yes. Who is this?" "I'm a journalist with the Seattle Chronicle. I'm writing a story about Flight 2819 survivors and near misses. Would you be willing to talk?" "No." I blocked the number. 3 more journalists contacted me over the next week. I blocked them all. I didn't want to be part of the story. Didn't want my face on the news talking about missing the flight. It felt exploitative and wrong. I went back to work 2 weeks after the crash. The office felt empty even though it wasn't. David's desk had been cleared. Jennifer's coffee mug was still in the break room. Troy's engineering certifications were still hanging on his cubicle wall. Catherine assigned me to a smaller project. Bridge inspection contract in Oregon. Nothing high stakes. Nothing that required travel. I threw myself into the work because it was easier than thinking about anything else. Came in early, stayed late, worked weekends. My coworker Amir asked if I was doing okay. I said I was fine. He didn't look convinced. The NTSB released their preliminary findings 6 weeks after the crash. Hydraulic system failure caused by metal fatigue in a critical component. The component had been manufactured by Vanguard Aerospace Systems and installed during routine maintenance 3 months prior. The airline had followed all proper protocols. This was a parts failure, not pilot error or maintenance negligence. Vanguard's stock dropped 38% in 1 day. They released a statement saying they were cooperating fully with the investigation and would implement immediate quality control improvements. I read the report 3 times trying to understand how a single component failure could bring down an entire aircraft. The engineering didn't make sense. Hydraulic systems had redundancies, backup systems, fail-safes. One part shouldn't be able to cause catastrophic failure. I pulled up the technical specifications for that aircraft model and started reading. Spent hours going through maintenance logs and system diagrams. Something was wrong. The timeline didn't work. The failure component was rated for 10,000 flight hours. The aircraft had only logged 4,000 since the part was installed. It shouldn't have failed from metal fatigue. Not this quickly. I called Catherine and asked if I could review the NTSB's full report, not just the public summary. She asked why. I said I had questions about the hydraulic system. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Diane, you need to let this go. The investigation is ongoing. The NTSB has experts handling it. You focusing on this isn't healthy." But I couldn't let it go. Spent that night reading everything I could find about Vanguard Aerospace Systems. They were a major supplier for commercial aircraft, contracts with every major airline, safety record that was mostly clean with a few minor recalls over the past decade. Nothing that suggested systemic problems. But then I found an article from 8 months ago, small trade publication. Headline read, "Vanguard faces internal audit after quality concerns." The article was brief, mentioned unnamed sources reporting pressure to meet production quotas, potential shortcuts in testing procedures, concerns raised by engineers that were dismissed by management. The company had conducted an internal audit and declared everything satisfactory. I screenshot the article and kept digging. Found a LinkedIn profile for someone who'd worked at Vanguard as a quality assurance engineer until 7 months ago. Her name was Lisa Kowalski. Her profile said she now worked at a different aerospace company. I sent her a message asking if she'd be willing to talk about her time at Vanguard. She responded the next morning. Not through LinkedIn. She gave me a personal email address. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Bellevue. She looked younger than I expected. Maybe 30, with tired eyes and nervous hands that kept fidgeting with her coffee cup. I explained who I was and why I wanted to talk. She listened without interrupting, then asked, "Did you lose someone on flight 2819? I shook my head. "I was supposed to be on that flight. Car trouble made me miss it." Her expression changed. "So you're asking these questions because you feel guilty you survived?" "I'm asking because the engineering doesn't make sense. That component shouldn't have failed. Not that quickly." Lisa looked around the coffee shop like she was checking to see if anyone was listening. Then she leaned forward and spoke quietly. "You're right. It shouldn't have. I spent 9 months at Vanguard trying to fix quality control problems before I quit. The hydraulic components were one of my biggest concerns. We were using substandard materials to cut costs, rushing testing protocols to meet production deadlines. I documented everything and submitted reports to my supervisors. They buried them." My hands went cold. "Buried them how?" "Deleted from the system. I kept copies on a personal drive, but officially those reports don't exist. When I pushed the issue, they told me I was being paranoid, that our products met all FAA standards. When I threatened to go to regulators, they fired me for insubordination and made me sign an NDA as part of my severance package." I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. "Can you tell me specifically what was wrong with the hydraulic components?" Lisa glanced at my phone. "Are you recording this?" "No, just taking notes. But I can record if you're willing to go on record." She shook her head. "I can't. The NDA has a penalty clause. If I violate it, I owe them $200,000. I can't afford that. I shouldn't even be talking to you." I put my phone away. "Then just tell me what to look for. Point me in the right direction." She thought about it for a long moment. "The fatigue testing. Check the documentation for batch A3391. That was the production run that included the component installed on flight 2819. The testing logs should show stress cycles and failure thresholds. If the logs match what actually happened during the crash, then maybe it was just a terrible accident. But if they don't match, if the component failed earlier than the testing predicted, then someone falsified those logs." I wrote down the batch number on a napkin. "How do I access testing logs?" "You don't. They're proprietary company records, but the NTSB would have requested them as part of the investigation. So I need to convince the NTSB to compare the testing logs against the actual failure data." Lisa nodded. "And good luck with that. They're not going to listen to a random engineer making conspiracy theories about a major aerospace supplier." I spent the next week trying to contact someone at the NTSB, left voicemails, sent emails, got automated responses saying my message had been received and someone would follow up within 10 business days. Nobody followed up. I tried a different approach, called the FAA, got transferred between departments 4 times before someone in the Aviation Safety Division finally took my information. They said they'd pass it along to the appropriate team. I didn't hear back. Tried the FBI. The woman I spoke to was polite but said unless I had evidence of a crime, there wasn't anything they could do. Suspected quality control issues weren't their jurisdiction. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon staring at the batch number scrawled on my napkin when Catherine came over. "I heard you've been calling federal agencies about the crash investigation." I looked up at her. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter? Diane, you need to stop. You're making the company look bad. We have contracts with airlines. We work with the FAA. You harassing investigators makes Prescott and Lane look unprofessional." "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions about component failure." Catherine sat on the edge of my desk and lowered her voice. "I know you're struggling with survivor's guilt. I get it. But you're not an aviation investigator. You're a structural engineer. This isn't your area of expertise and it's not your responsibility. Please, for your own well-being and for the sake of this company, let the professionals handle it." I wanted to argue. Wanted to show her the article about Vanguard's quality concerns and tell her about Lisa's allegations. But looking at Catherine's face, I knew she wouldn't listen. She'd already decided I was having some kind of emotional breakdown. Okay, I said. I'll stop. She looked relieved. Thank you. Now, how's the Oregon Bridge project coming? I didn't stop, just got more careful about it. Started researching from home instead of work. Used my personal email instead of my company account. Found a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower cases. Her name was Simone Blackwell, 15 years practicing corporate accountability law. I met her at her office in downtown Seattle and explained everything. The suspicious component failure, Lisa's allegations about falsified testing, Vanguard's history of quality concerns. Simone listened carefully and took notes. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have any physical evidence, documents, recordings, anything beyond hearsay from a former employee who signed an NDA?" "No, that's why I'm here. I need help getting access to Vanguard's testing logs." Simone shook her head. "Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, I can't file a case against them. And you personally don't have standing to request proprietary company documents. You're not a victim's family member. You're not a party to the NTSB investigation. Legally, you're just a concerned citizen with a theory." "So there's nothing I can do?" "I didn't say that. You could try contacting the families. If they requested the testing logs through their attorneys as part of a wrongful death lawsuit, Vanguard would have to turn them over during discovery. But that's a long process, and there's no guarantee the families would want your help." She gave me the contact information for the law firm representing several Flight 2819 families. I called them the next day. Spoke to a paralegal who took my information and said an attorney would call me back. 3 days later, I got a call from Douglas Kaplan, partner at Kaplan & Associates, 23 years in aviation litigation. I explained my concerns about the component failure and the possibility of falsified testing data. Douglas listened politely, then said, "Ms. Foster, we appreciate you reaching out, but we already have expert witnesses reviewing the NTSB findings. If there's evidence of negligence or fraud, they'll find it." "Have your experts specifically looked at batch A3391's fatigue testing logs?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of our investigation, but I can assure you we're being thorough." "Mr. Kaplan, I'm a licensed structural engineer with 8 years of experience. I understand materials science and stress testing. I'm telling you the failure timeline doesn't match the component's rated specifications. Someone should verify those testing logs. And I'm telling you we have people doing exactly that. If you have actual evidence beyond speculation, I'm happy to review it. Otherwise, I need to get back to work. We have 43 families counting on us." He hung up. I sat there feeling helpless and frustrated. Everyone kept dismissing me, telling me to let it go, trust the experts, stop making trouble. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being overlooked or deliberately hidden. I tried a different approach. Went through my professional network looking for anyone who worked in aerospace or had connections to Vanguard. Found a former classmate from grad school who'd taken a job at Boeing. His name was Neil Sutherland. We'd been study partners for our materials engineering course. I sent him a message asking if we could meet for coffee. He suggested a place near his office in Renton. We caught up for a while talking about careers and life since graduation. Then I steered the conversation toward Vanguard. "Do you know anyone who works there, or used to work there?" Neil's expression got cautious. "Why are you asking?" "I'm looking into some concerns about their quality control, specifically around hydraulic components." He set down his coffee cup. "This is about Flight 2819. "Yes." "Diane, you're playing with fire. Vanguard has an army of lawyers. If you start making accusations without ironclad proof, they'll bury you in lawsuits." "So there are problems with their quality control?" Neil looked around the coffee shop, then spoke quietly. "I've heard things. Nothing I can confirm. Rumors about production pressures, concerns that got escalated and then quietly disappeared. But nobody's willing to go on record because Vanguard retaliates. They've sued former employees for defamation. They've gotten people blacklisted from the industry. They have contracts with every major airline and aircraft manufacturer. Cross them and you'll never work in aerospace again." "What if I could prove they falsified testing data? What if I could show that the component that failed on Flight 2819 was never properly tested?" "Then you'd need to bring that evidence to the NTSB or the FAA. Not to me, not to random people in the industry, to the actual authorities investigating the crash." "I've tried. They won't listen to me." Neil shook his head. "Then maybe you need to accept that this isn't your fight. You're a structural engineer. You do bridges and buildings. Let the aviation people handle aviation." Everyone kept saying the same thing, but none of them had missed that flight by minutes. None of them had 4 dead colleagues who took their place on a plane that shouldn't have crashed. I went home that night and pulled out every piece of information I'd collected. The trade article about Vanguard's quality concerns, the batch number Lisa had given me, screenshots of LinkedIn profiles for other former Vanguard employees, notes from my conversations with lawyers and federal agencies. I spread it all out on my dining room table and tried to see the pattern, tried to figure out what I was missing. My phone rang at 9:34 p.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Diane Foster?" A man's voice I didn't recognize. "Who's asking?" "My name is Thomas Greer. I'm an investigative journalist with ProPublica. I've been looking into Vanguard Aerospace Systems for the past 6 months. I heard you've been asking questions about Flight 2819. My pulse quickened. How did you hear that? I have sources in the industry. Word gets around when someone starts poking into Vanguard's business. I'd like to talk to you. Compare notes. See if we're looking at the same pattern. I hesitated. Catherine had warned me about talking to journalists. Simone had said I needed concrete evidence. Everyone had told me to let this go. Miss Foster, I know you're being careful. I know people have probably told you to stop digging, but I have documents, internal Vanguard emails, quality control reports that were supposed to be destroyed, testimony from 3 former employees who are willing to go on record if I can corroborate their claims. If what I think happened actually happened, this wasn't just negligence, this was criminal, and you might be the missing piece I need to prove it. We met the next morning at Thomas's office in a building near Pike Place Market. He was in his early 50s, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down, with the kind of intense focus that made you believe he'd read every document twice. His desk was covered in files and printouts. He cleared a space for me to sit and pulled out a thick folder. Before we start, I need to know how much you know and how you know it. I told him everything. The car trouble that saved my life, my colleagues who died, the component failure that didn't make engineering sense, Lisa Kowalski's allegations about falsified testing, the batch number, my failed attempts to get authorities to take me seriously. Thomas listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he opened the folder and pulled out a spreadsheet. This is a list of every hydraulic component Vanguard manufactured in the past 2 years that's been installed in commercial aircraft. I've highlighted the ones from batch A3391. Flight 2819 wasn't the first failure. There have been 3 other incidents, 2 emergency landings and 1 crash that was officially ruled pilot error, but had hydraulic anomalies that were never fully explained. All 4 aircraft had components from the same batch. He showed me the documentation, incident reports, maintenance logs, NTSB summaries. The pattern was undeniable once you knew to look for it. Why hasn't anyone noticed this before? Because they weren't looking. The crashes happened in different regions with different airlines. The NTSB treats each incident separately, and Vanguard has been actively suppressing information about quality control problems. Look at this. He pulled out printouts of internal emails. They were dated from 14 months ago. The sender was a Vanguard quality assurance manager named Michael Brennan. The recipient was the company's VP of production. The subject line said, "Urgent, batch A3391 testing anomalies." I read the email. Michael had identified irregularities in the fatigue testing for batch A3391. The components were failing stress tests at roughly 60% of their rated capacity. He recommended halting production and reviewing manufacturing protocols. The VP's response was 2 sentences. "Production quotas are non-negotiable. Find a way to make the numbers work." 3 emails down, Michael had written to the VP again. "I cannot in good conscience certify these components as safe. The testing data shows clear quality control failures." The VP's response? "Then don't certify them. I'll find someone who will." I looked up at Thomas. "Where did you get these?" "A source inside Vanguard who's been leaking documents for months. They're terrified of being identified, but they want this exposed." "Can I talk to them?" "No, they'll only communicate with me and only through encrypted channels, but they've provided enough documentation to establish a pattern. Vanguard knew these components were defective. They certified them anyway. They installed them in commercial aircraft knowing they could fail. And when they did fail, the company used their influence to keep the investigations from looking too closely." I felt my hands shaking. 153 people died because a company decided production quotas were more important than safety. Exactly, and I can prove it. But I need more than internal emails. I need someone with engineering expertise to verify that the component failure on Flight 2819 matches the testing anomalies Michael Brennan identified. I need you to review the technical data and confirm that the crash was caused by a defect Vanguard knew about. This was what I'd been looking for. A way to make the authorities listen. A way to hold someone accountable. "What do you need from me?" Thomas pulled out another folder. "These are the NTSB's technical findings on the Flight 2819 hydraulic failure. And these are the original testing logs for batch A3391 that my source leaked. I need you to compare them. Tell me if the real-world failure matches what Vanguard's internal testing predicted. If it does, we can prove they knowingly installed defective components." I spent the next 4 hours going through the documents. The NTSB report showed the hydraulic component had catastrophically failed at approximately 4,100 flight hours. The testing logs showed components from batch A3391 failing during stress tests at an average of 4,300 flight hours, far below the rated 10,000 hour specification. The correlation was damning. The part that failed on Flight 2819 had performed almost exactly as Vanguard's internal testing predicted it would, not as their official certifications claimed it would. I wrote up a detailed technical analysis documenting the comparison, highlighted the specific failure points, explained in engineering terms why this proved Vanguard had falsified their safety certifications. Thomas read my report and smiled for the first time. "This is exactly what I needed. With your analysis and the internal documents, I can publish a story that will force the FAA to ground every aircraft with these components and launch a criminal investigation into Vanguard." He published the story 3 days later. The headline read, "Defective Parts, Deadly Consequences, How Vanguard Aerospace Knowingly Installed Faulty Components in Commercial Aircraft." The article included the internal emails, the testing data comparison, my technical analysis, and testimony from Lisa Kowalski and 2 other former Vanguard employees who agreed to go on record. It ran on ProPublica's website and was immediately picked up by every major news outlet. Vanguard stock dropped 52% before trading was halted. The FAA issued an emergency order grounding all aircraft with batch A3391 components pending immediate inspections. The Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation. Congressional hearings were announced. My phone exploded with calls from reporters, lawyers, and federal investigators. Catherine called me at 7:15 that evening. Her voice was tight. "Did you cooperate with that ProPublica article?" "Yes." "Jesus Christ, Diane, do you have any idea what you've done? Vanguard supplies components for half the projects Prescott and Lane works on. Our relationship with them is worth millions in contracts. You just torched our business relationship." "They killed 153 people, Catherine. They knowingly installed defective parts. I don't care about our business relationship." "Well, you should care about your employment. The partners are meeting tomorrow morning to discuss your status with the company. I can't protect you from this." "I'm not asking you to." She hung up. I sat there feeling strangely calm. I'd known there would be consequences. Known that exposing Vanguard would probably cost me my job. But for the first time since missing that flight, I felt like I'd done something that mattered. Simone Blackwell called me an hour later. "I just read the ProPublica article. You could have called me before going public with this." "Would you have advised me to do it?" "Absolutely not. You just painted a target on your back. Vanguard's legal team is going to come after you hard. They'll try to discredit your analysis, sue you for defamation, make your life miserable." "Let them try. I did the math correctly. My engineering analysis is sound. Everything I said can be backed up with documentation." "That's not how this works. Truth is a defense against defamation, but defending yourself costs money. Legal fees, expert witnesses, years of litigation. Can you afford that?" I thought about my savings account. "Not really." "Then you need protection. I'm calling Douglas Kaplan at the firm representing the Flight 2819 families. They're going to want your testimony for their wrongful death lawsuit. In exchange, they can provide you with legal representation if Vanguard comes after you. It's not perfect, but it's better than facing their lawyers alone." Douglas Kaplan called me the next morning. His tone was completely different from our first conversation. "Miss Foster, I owe you an apology. You were right about the testing data. We should have listened to you. Can you come to our office today? We need to depose you for the wrongful death case." I met with him and 3 other attorneys that afternoon. They asked me detailed questions about my analysis, about how I'd obtained the information, about my conversations with Lisa Kowalski and Thomas Greer. I answered everything honestly. When we finished, Douglas explained the situation. Vanguard is going to deny everything. They'll claim the internal emails were taken out of context, that the testing anomalies were corrected before the components shipped, that your analysis is biased because you feel guilty about missing the flight. We need you to be prepared for them to attack your credibility. "I can handle it." "Good, because you're going to be the key witness in what might be the biggest aviation negligence case in history. The families are suing Vanguard for wrongful death, punitive damages, and fraud. We're seeking $1 billion in total damages. Your testimony will establish that Vanguard had actual knowledge of the defect. That makes this criminal, not just negligent." I signed the paperwork making me an expert witness. Agreed to testify at trial. Douglas assigned one of his associates, a young attorney named Rachel Flynn, to coordinate with me and prepare my testimony. She explained that Vanguard would likely try to settle once they saw the strength of our evidence, but if they didn't, we'd be going to trial in about 18 months. I got fired from Prescott and Lane the following Monday. Catherine delivered the news in a conference room with an HR representative present. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately for violation of company policy regarding client relationships and public statements. You'll receive 2 week severance. Your company laptop and security badge need to be returned today." I didn't argue, just signed the paperwork and packed up my desk. Amir helped me carry boxes to my car. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Those people deserve to know the truth." I thanked him and drove home with everything I owned from 8 years at Prescott and Lane stacked in my trunk. The Department of Justice investigation moved quickly. Federal prosecutors subpoenaed Vanguard's records and brought in a grand jury. Within 6 weeks, criminal charges were filed against 3 Vanguard executives, including the VP of production, who'd told Michael Brennan to make the numbers work. They were charged with fraud, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. The trial started 8 months later. I watched most of it from the gallery. Prosecutors presented the internal emails, the falsified testing data, testimony from former employees. Michael Brennan, the quality assurance manager who'd tried to stop the defective components from shipping, testified for 3 days. He explained how he'd been pressured to certify components he knew were unsafe, how his concerns had been dismissed, and eventually he'd been reassigned to a different department. The defense argued that the executives had relied on engineering reports that showed the components met FAA standards, that any quality control issues had been addressed before the parts shipped, that the crash was a tragic accident, not a crime. The jury deliberated for 4 days, found all 3 executives guilty on all counts. The VP of production got 15 years in federal prison. The other 2 got 10 and 8 years respectively. Vanguard's stock was delisted. The company filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. I testified in the civil wrongful death trial 2 months after the criminal convictions. Spent 6 hours on the witness stand explaining my technical analysis. Vanguard's attorneys tried to discredit me, asking about my lack of aviation engineering credentials, my emotional state after missing the flight, whether I had any financial interest in the outcome of the case. I answered every question calmly and accurately. Rachel had prepared me well. The jury awarded the families $1.3 billion in damages. Vanguard's remaining assets were liquidated to pay the settlement. The company ceased to exist. Douglas called me after the verdict. You did it. You held them accountable. Those families will never get their loved ones back, but at least they got justice. I didn't do it alone. No, but you're the one who refused to let this go when everyone told you to. That matters. I found a new job 4 months later at a smaller engineering firm that specialized in forensic analysis. They'd read about my role in the Vanguard case and wanted someone with my attention to detail. The work was interesting, investigating structural failures, analyzing why buildings collapsed or bridges failed, looking for the truth in the evidence. I was good at it. My Toyota finally died completely 6 months after the crash. The mechanic who'd looked at it said the starter motor had seized, completely failed, unfixable. He asked if I wanted to rebuild the engine or just scrap the car. I told him to scrap it. Bought a used Subaru with better safety ratings. But sometimes I thought about that grinding sound. The metallic shriek that kept me from getting to the airport on time. The random mechanical failure that saved my life and cost 153 people theirs. I still couldn't decide if I was lucky or cursed. Probably both. Thomas Greer won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism for his Vanguard reporting. He thanked me in his acceptance speech, which was embarrassing, but also validating. Lisa Kowalski got a job at the FAA helping redesign quality control oversight for aerospace suppliers. She sent me an email saying she was glad someone had finally listened. I visited David Renfro's grave on the 1-year anniversary of the crash. His wife was there, placing flowers. We talked for a few minutes. She thanked me for what I'd done, said David would have been proud. I cried in my car afterward for the first time since it happened. The guilt didn't go away, probably never would, but at least I'd done something with it, turned it into action instead of paralysis, made sure their deaths led to changes that might prevent future crashes. That was something. Not enough, but something. I still think about that morning sometimes. The grinding sound, the clicking, the dead battery, the cascade of small delays that kept me from boarding Flight 2819. If my car had started normally, I'd be dead. David and Jennifer and Troy would still be dead, but nobody would have known about Vanguard's fraud. The defective components would still be in aircraft. More crashes would have happened. More people would have died. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just random chance. But I survived and I made it count. That's all anyone can do. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.